Hello, lords and ladies. Today we're going to look at the Great Depression and its global impact, how it's going to affect all the countries in the world, not just the United States, which is probably the perspective you already are well familiar with. So what we have in mind in terms of our objectives, we really are going to focus, we do still have to talk about what happens in the United States because and it starts the Depression, but we're especially going to try to focus on how that then impacts the rest of the world. So our first objective is to analyze the factors that cause the Great Depression, explain how the Great Depression then spreads around the world. And we also want to do some evaluating and making a judgment about how and what these global effects are going to be. So how is it going to affect everyone else, and what is going to be the scope of these effects that we see. Okay, and I'm sure that you probably know that it starts with the United States stock market, and you can go back a second and pause it if you needed more time to write. But I know that you understand that it does start with the United States stock market. So let's take a look first at the factors that the 20s saw in our economy and how it's growing. So the United States economy in the 1920s, in the beginning part of the 1920s, was flourishing, meaning it was doing very, very well. We had come out of the war. Remember, the war had predominantly been fought in Europe, right? Pretty much only been fought in Europe, and so we didn't have to rebuild much like some of these other countries. So we were the leading the leading economic power in the world after World War I. We had built all kinds of machinery and all of that. So our economy was growing very steadily throughout the 20s, most of it, till we get to the end. Mostly driven by our automobile industry as well as consumer goods. Consumer goods are any goods that are made that people don't necessarily need. Radios, washing machines, things like that. And you can back it up and pause it if you need more time. But those are the types of areas that we would be looking at with the U.S. economy in the 1920s and how it's going to be growing. Now, part of what drives this growth is the American stock market, which is what I'm sure you guys have been taught in the past about the Great Depression, is that the stock market and what we called speculation on the stock market really drove a lot of the things that were going to happen that set this depression in motion. So I hope that you know already and understand that stocks are shares of ownership in a company. Businesses get money to run their companies by selling shares of stock to investors, meaning buyers. Okay, so as industry is growing, what we see is that stock values are going to increase. Companies pay interest on money that's invested to their shareholders, so they give them dividends, meaning profits. Many Americans are so intrigued by the ability to maybe get these profits that they buy on the margin, meaning they borrow the money. All of this speculation makes the stock prices go up even higher. So again, you could go back and pause if you needed to, but that is really what's going to drive people borrowing money, buying on the margin, and they then put that money into the stock market. So I want to show you a quick picture of the stock exchange floor in the 1920s. You see that it's bustling. There's a lot of activity, even in the 1920s, that goes on in that stock market. So it was flourishing. It was doing really well. However, what is not understood fully is the fact that there are a lot of hidden problems with this. So we, no doubt, in the 1920s were very, very, very prosperous. However, there were three underlying issues. We had an uneven distribution of wealth, which you're going to see 1% of the population earned 19% of all the income in the country. The average everyday person is relying on credit to buy all of their consumer goods, the things that they want. And once they hit their credit limit, then you're going to see spending slowing down. And we talked about in class how this is something that has also recently affected our country in terms of consumer spending and how that drives the economy. And that when it slows down, it's going to have an effect on other markets, such as the stock market, the housing market. So by the fall of 1929, consumers were not spending any money. They weren't buying any consumer goods, and that led to overproduction, and the people had in their companies and their businesses an overproduction of goods that were just sitting on the shelves. That is going to make them then want to lay off people, put people out of work, because they have to cut costs somewhere, and a lot of what they have is sitting in their inventory. So when we look at those factors, you guys can see why those hidden problems are going to be such an issue for the United States and the stock market. So the factors at work then, why the stock market crashes. Again, all of those factors that we talked about. So in 1929, Wall Street, much like today, is a leading financial market in the entire world. You have, if you ever go down Wall Street, you see there's banks, investment companies all over the place. New York Stock Exchange is known the world over. Well, this stock market starts to experience some pains because investors start panicking because there's no spending, profits are going down, so they start selling off their stock. Black Tuesday we know is the worst day of it, October 29th, 1929. And if you were an investor, you're going to have to sell at a loss to repay what you had borrowed. When the stock market crashes, it hurts banks, it hurts investors, and it hurts industry. Okay, so when you see the stock market crash, you see people start to really panic. And again, that panic sets off the selling of the stocks. The stock market crash hurts the banks. Banks start closing. Investors start going bankrupt. Industries start feeling the pain. And so you're going to see that this pain that's coming from the stock market crash is going to spread to everyone in the society in the United States. And now start thinking about how this is then going to impact the rest of the world. Because what is the relationship between the United States and other countries financially? If in your world that it's even more connected, interdependent than it was back then. So today we're a much more globalized economy. So take a look at this front page from a paper, okay? The Black Tuesday, the stock market crash of 1929. I mean, it's out there. Everybody is feeling the pain of this. Stock market cartoon here, you see the roller coaster goes up, down, way up, and then boom, just abruptly cut off. So that's political commentary on the stock market and the stock market crash in 1929 and how it's going to affect people. We know that the United States goes into the Great Depression after this stock market crash. The stock market crash really brings down the American economy, and we are in absolute chaos. It's literally a standstill. People are starving, no homes. It's unprecedented in history, and nothing worse after it so far. So the causes, again, kind of reiterating what we were saying, industrial slowing down leads them to lay off their workers. So this overproduction of goods that they cannot sell allows them, or forces them now, to fire many of their employees, or at the very least, to put them on leave. Banks start to fail, and our president at the time, Hoover, favored laissez-faire, meaning no government real involvement in righting this business wrong. So business should fend for itself, in his opinion, and it wasn't the government's place to get involved. Unfortunately for the American people, that causes them a great amount of discomfort, and so his dealing with it does not help matters. Here's a picture, $100 will buy this car, have to have cash, lost all on the stock market, giving you a little bit of, simple insight into what was going on. We're going to see some more pictures from this time period as well. If you take a look at these kids, why can't you give my dad a job? Rare Eggs kid doesn't starve, why should we? Going targeting the business owner who is still doing well. This is a famous picture, one of the most iconic from the Great Depression, of a migrant working mother living in a tent with her children. And then here we have a businessman, dressed, suit, hat, everything, reduced to now sleeping on a park bench. So you see the impact on America. Now let's take a look at how it's going to impact the rest of the world. When you talk about the Depression, people, again, always think about the United States, but it absolutely impacts the rest of the world to the point where you see entire economies flipped upside down to where there is just pain and misery, much like what we see in the United States. In fact, Canada is one area, our closest neighbor to the north, that you see tremendous impact on. Now, European countries are relying on the U.S. mainly for loans in the aftermath of their Great War. They need to rebuild their countries, particularly France, Germany, Russia. Many countries were already in economic trouble before the market crashes. So Germany was already experiencing inflation, which I'll show you a little bit about in a second. And Japan was in trouble, and we talked about that with Japan, that they had overexpanded their economy and that they felt that expansion into other areas was the way they would go through. And then Britain had been spending so much money on its military to compete with Germany and France and all of the other countries that they really had problems before the Great Depression hit. So this is only going to compound things. We're going to continue on that same thought in a few moments, but I want to show you a couple of pictures. These are both from Germany, and they are both going to show you what it was like to be in Germany during the Depression, and even a little bit before, because Germany, as we said, experienced a large problem with inflation. Inflation means, remember hopefully from class, that money loses its value, prices go up. So here are some people protesting in Germany, asking for assistance and going in the communist route. Here you see children actually playing with German marks and building a house with it because money was so worthless the parents literally just handed it to them and said, go play. And I gave you a picture in your packet that showed you individuals who were actually wallpapering their walls with German currency rather than spending it because it was cheaper to do that than to purchase the wallpaper. So now on this slide we're going to continue with how the Depression impacts the world, and we're going to look at how some things that were done to be protective actually ended up causing more problems. The first thing will be the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. This act really hurts every country, and it does a lot to end trade, essentially, to make it slow down to the point where it's not even going to be a factor that helps people anymore. So when we look at this Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, a tariff, again, we discussed this in class, a tariff is a tax placed on imports. So Congress decides that this is the best course of action, that we are going to place tax on any goods that come into our country, and the idea is to protect our own trade because our own businesses are failing, are challenged, and are not doing well. The problem is that other countries are going to see that act and they're going to be A, angry because you're hurting their trade and they're already in bad straits, and B, they're going to be protective then of their own industry and their own trade, so they then increase their tariffs on our goods. This has completely the opposite effect of what every government wanted. It brings trade to a standstill, which further plunges the economies of the world into the Great Depression. So an attempt to try to intervene and to do something and put something in place really does much more damage than good. And so it starts essentially a trade war. And it stops all trade because nobody is going to want to trade with the other countries, particularly when they know that is the fallout from doing so. And why would you trade with them if they're going to put taxes on your goods? Now, beyond the economic impact of the Depression, the other impact I want to look at globally is the political impact. The political impact of the Depression is going to be profound. Now, this political impact reaches all throughout all walks of life and through all kinds of countries. It's going to be devastating for some countries. So the initial idea is that democratic government has failed. We're going to have to pause for a second. So what you're going to see is that politically this Depression, all of these governments were already weak throughout Europe. The British government somewhat, the French government, the German government, the Italian government, the Austrian government, all these governments are having trouble. Now, they're all, at this point, they're virtually all democratic, with the exception of Italy, although it does have democratic elements. And so what you're going to see is that, like any situation, whenever people's needs are not met, they look to the government and they blame the government for failing. So the depression causes people to be angrier and more frustrated with their government. What's going to happen is democracy is seen as a failure, that it has not helped the people and it has not prevented this awful tragedy from befalling them. So people start to listen to extremists. They start to listen to the Hitlers with the Nazis in Germany, the Mussolinis with the fascists in Italy, who are promising them everything that they need. And those people are desperate. Their biggest worry is democracy the better choice? Their biggest worry is, how do I feed my kids? And what do I do to get a job and to make my life better? So they are looking for strong, sturdy, powerful leadership that will bring to them the things that they need to survive. They are not concerned with the larger ideological questions, the more philosophical matters of, is democracy the best form of government? Who cares? If I can't feed my kids, I don't care. I want to hear how you are going to put food and my ability to get my kids' food on my table. That's what people want to hear about. They don't want to hear, well, you have all these rights and freedom. Nah, who cares? I need the necessities of life. I need my children to be happy. So here's Mussolini in Italy, and here's Hitler coming up in Germany. These men and men like them are going to come into power in many countries throughout Europe and the world for that matter. So again, looking at the depression, its overall effects, you cannot overestimate how much it contributed to what's going to happen and how much it contributes to the outbreak of World War II. And that's where we'll leave it, because I'm sure your eyes are glazing over. And have a good night. Thanks.